Winter was the worst time to be a stray cat. Grim opened his eyes, his fur sticky with snow. He looked around to either side, attempting to recall how he got there. "Meow," he murmured, looking up at the torii above. His paws crunched softly in the snow, the shrine all but abandoned. There were a few other cats there, but none of them seemed interested in him. They slept in a pile beside the incense warmer, huddled underneath a stone structure where the snow had yet to touch. "Meow," he tried, but the other cats didn't move. He walked along, hearing the boots of what could only be a human. His fur stiffened, and he darted behind the shrine, watching as a human came to toss kibble at the pile of cats, who instantly rose to descend on the meager bits of food. Grim's heart pounded in his chest, the human too close to comfort. Their species had never shown any sort of kindness to him. The mountains were cold, and the landscape unforgiving, but he fit right in. By day, Grim would hunt mice and climb trees to catch birds. At night, he would sleep in a cave with an old blanket. The days turned to months, and suddenly, a year had passed since he had made his home in the mountains. Winter turned to spring, and before he knew it, summer was here. That's when Grim met her. She was what humans would often call a stray. She slept in a tent, using the mountainside to shelter her from wind on the cool evenings. When it was warm, she would wade in the river, his river, and catch fish to roast over a fire. When it was cold, she would sit inside her red tent and read books to a stuffed bear. She was a young human, by Grim's estimate, and he figured that she would leave soon. At least that's what he thought. Until he was hunting one day, trying to pay no mind to the human girl who scared all the birds and mice away. Grim was hungry and annoyed, but he thought he might have spotted dinner. A smug-looking chickadee sitting on a branch. His tail wound up and he was prepared to attack, but his paw slipped and he fell from his perch, landing with a thud. What was that? The human girl poked her head out of the tent, the late summer cicadas louder than ever. "Oh, it's a cat!" She stood over Grim, her knife in one hand. Grim hissed, untrusting of humans. She looked at her knife and clumsily stored it in her jacket before kneeling down. The cat bared his fangs, his ears and tail pointed and alert. "Don't worry, kitty. I'm not gonna hurt you." Grim attempted to rise to his paws, but realized quickly that there was something wrong with his hind leg. It must have broken when he fell. The human girl moved closer, lifting him. Grim howled, scratching her arm. She winced, her blood dripping down her wrist, but she did not let go. Instead, she carried Grim to her tent and set him down ever so gently on a plush human blanket. "You poor thing. You must be hurting pretty badly. Stay here. I'll be right back." Grim attempted to rise to his paws, but his leg dragged behind him. The human returned quickly and set down a bowl of water. "Lay down," she ordered, and Grim collapsed, too weak to move. She was careful, ripping up strips of fabric and tying his leg to a set of sticks she must have cut with her knife. Grim howled in pain when she touched it. His back leg was most definitely broken. "That's a good boy," she stroked his cheek, her touch reminding him of someone. The human checked on him several times throughout the night, feeding him bits of fish and calling him pretty. She spent the next few weeks nursing him back to health, allowing Grim to live in the cozy confines of her red tent. It was during this time that Grim came to realize maybe not all humans were bad. "What should I call you?" she asked one day, while unwrapping his leg from the makeshift cast. "I know. I'll call you Kuro." Grim howled in disapproval. He already had a name. "You like it? That's great," she giggled. "You can call me Yui." Yui, as Grim came to learn, had been kicked out of her house by her parents for loving a man they believed unsuitable. When she had been kicked out, he had abandoned her, leaving Yui with no choice but to live in the woods. "But you wouldn't abandon me, would you, Kuro?" she asked with a laugh, stroking his fur while they sat. Before the fire, Grim meowed and Yui laughed, the two of them falling to sleep in their tent like they did every night. The next morning, there was something wrong with the stray human. "Meow?" Grim asked, seeing her face was red. What is it, Kuro?" she asked, her breathing labored. I'll be okay. Don't worry. Grim nudged her hand with his head and left the tent. He needed to find help, but he didn't know how. He descended the mountain, heading towards the shrine, but unlike last time, the shrine was devoid of life. Grim went back up the mountain as quickly as he could, but by the time he arrived, Yui was in worse condition. She was shaking, and despite the late summer heat, was bundled up beneath her blankets. Grim circled around her as she cried, wondering how fate could be so cruel. Kuro, you won't leave me, right? She asked, her face red. Grim nudged his head against her hand, the two of them resting there, until her breathing slowed. Kuro, Yui whispered. You have to live, okay? She stroked his fur, her hands shaking. You have to live. For both of us. But Grim didn't understand her words. He was a cat. How could he live for a human? He climbed into the sleeping bag with her, putting her paw on his chest. Meow. Grim tried to tell her, but her breathing continued to slow. Meow. Grim panicked, watching as her eyes dimmed. He had seen this with other strays, when they hadn't eaten in weeks, or the humans that would chase them into the road. Meow. Grim tried again, louder this time, but Yui didn't move. Her eyes stared up at the tent ceiling, unblinking. Meow! Meow! Grim turned in circles, begging for anyone to hear them. His human, his stray. She needed help. Meow! It was then that something strange happened. A bright white light encapsulated his body. You found something to hold dear, haven't you? A voice asked, hands reaching out into the light for him. Grim yelled, begging the voice, but he knew the cruelty of humans. He knew that they would not help. She wanted you to live. His paws lengthened, and his claws grew into fingers. His body lost its fur, and his tail became smaller. Grim howled, his voice turning into screams. He lay naked in the red tent. Yui's body was gone. When Grim next came to, he stood in front of the river, staring at his reflection. Silky black hair and yellow eyes looked back at him. His hands, now human hands, reached up to touch his ears. What was he to do now?